Most of what we know about exercise science is based on young, athletic men. But women are not small men, and when research ignores their unique physiology, health outcomes suffer. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age. My guest is Dr. Emma Cowley. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the HERizon Center in Ireland and a rising leader in women's health research. She's also the lead of the Invisible Sportswomen International Research Collective and part of Míde, a groundbreaking all-island consortium working to recenter women and girls in sport, exercise, and health science. In this conversation, we'll talk about the gender gap in exercise physiology, why midlife and aging women have been underserved by mainstream research, and what's finally being done to change that. Emma's work is not about filling the gaps, it's about helping women move, feel, and age well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health. Emma, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and really what led you into the field of women's health and exercise science.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me on. This is really exciting and nice. So I did my undergrad in PE and biology. I was an active kid, but I wasn't, I enjoyed PE. And so that's why I kind of thought that would be what I would like to do as my career. And then as part of the PE undergraduate program, you had to do a placement in schools. And I loved that, except the majority of girls would bring in notes to say they couldn't take part in PE because they had their period, or they couldn't take part in PE because they forgot their uniform. And I think, I saw really great PE teachers, but they were kind of stuck in this structure at the time of teaching really traditional sports on a curriculum that didn't really allow them to engage people who weren't particularly sporty. It's not that they didn't want to be active, but they just didn't want to play football, or they didn't want to play basketball. They wanted to move, but the curriculum didn't allow for that. So I decided, okay, well, maybe I couldn't fit into that as a PE teacher, but maybe I'd like to understand that more and kind of go down the research side. So I did a master's and then I did my PhD, and that focused on physical activity for teenage girls. And I think quickly into the PhD, I realized that maybe it's not so much about just having a physical activity intervention for 12 weeks to increase accelerometer-based physical activity. I think one of my mentors, Dr. Paula Watson, is a sports psychologist, and she came on as one of my mentors and kind of talked about how maybe it's about first changing girls' understanding about what physical activity and exercise and sport means. And if we can just give them a bit more of a positive experience, let them know that going on a hike or doing a yoga class or walking the dog, they're all types of physical activity and exercise. And if we can just slowly start to shift their mindset to, moving their bodies being more positive, then maybe those accelerometer changes would come down the line. And I think during that PhD, obviously I was reading a lot of literature about girls in, sport and exercise science journals, but I kind of realized there wasn't all that much. And that kind of brought me to the Costello paper, which was that initial kind of sex audit in sport and exercise science, and subsequently on to Invisible Sportswomen.
So what is the story behind the Invisible Sportswoman Research Collective, and what does the name mean?
Well, I guess it came from reading the Costello paper, and I always get this reference. I don't know if it's 2013 or two, but it's around that time period. And basically they found that there was a huge deficit in the number of women involved in sport and exercise science studies as participants. And, fast forward to 2020, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be way better now. That gap is going to be really reduced. And it was during COVID. And so, I had a lot of free time on my hands. And so I decided, okay, well, let's redo that audit and see, has the gap changed? And so that's when I started working with a couple of other researchers at the time, like Kelly McNulty and Alyssa Olnick, and we just recreated the audit. It was a really simple study. It was a high volume study. We had I think there's over 10 million participants included in it. But basically the needle hadn't shifted at all. There's still only 6% of research exclusively conducted on females at the time. And the name came from Invisible Women is a book by Caroline Perez Criado. I hope I don't absolutely butcher that, but I had read her book at the time and I was just gobsmacked as, she had, this book talks about how like army soldier uniforms are just created for men, not for women, and the effect that has on female soldiers' safety. Car crash dummies are men and how that affects the safety of women driving cars. She had all these examples, and so that's where the name Invisible Sportswomen comes from.
Okay, and that number, the 6%, really, really bothers me as an exercise physiologist. And we talked a little bit before we started recording about kind of Sam Moore, one of my former students who you worked with when you were at North Carolina. And Sam was on, I believe it was episode 144. I had her guest on here, and she was led to the field because she didn't see herself in my exercise physiology class. And I really took that to heart. It's like, oh, yeah, we're like basing all these decisions on how we direct women to exercise, and we have no evidence to base it on. And even when you talk about menopause and perimenopause and all that, we're given recommendations off of very limited information. And so I applaud the work that you and your colleagues are doing to be able to bring a little bit better light to the gaps in the exercise science literature, and more specifically, coming up with the better guidelines for women in exercise, because I don't know if our listeners realize this, but women and men are not exactly the same, right? Although there's, pretty diverse, continuum between, women that are exercising and various sports capacities and things like that. And so how did your work in the U.S. on cardio-metabolic health inform your research focus today?
Oh, I mean, honestly, it didn't. So I did my postdoc at the cardio-metabolic lab at UNC Chapel Hill, and that was a wonderful experience as, growing as a researcher. I had experience in physical activity and behavior change, and so this is a whole new world to me. And working with Lee Stoner and Eric Hansen, they were really great mentors in showing me just, I wasn't really in a lab setting, before. And so figuring out how to even do a DEXA was all new to me. And that's when I met Sam and Abby Smith-Ryan. And so I think it was a really formative experience in terms of developing research skills, but I cannot say that I would be a competent cardio-metabolic researcher. However, they had a huge study running there that I was, there to do my postdoc on, and they were looking at the cardio-metabolic health of college-aged students. And so we have 500 participants there that had two different data collection points. And so the students there now are just wrapping up that study. And of course, one of the outcomes that they're going to be looking at is, are there differences between the men and women students? And I'm really excited about that. But that is just wrapping up at the moment. So hopefully we'll have something out in the next, year or so.
And you've done quite a few postdocs, haven't you? I was kind of looking on LinkedIn at your background, and it's like, well, she's done more postdocs than I think most people I know in the field. How many have you done?
So I had a very short one in Ireland after my PhD while we were waiting to get visas and everything sorted for the US. So that was at DCU in Dublin. So that was interesting. That was around college-aged students' health literacy. Again, it was, it's a really interesting topic, but it was more, I suppose, a stepping stone until we got over to the States. And so then I had the cardio-metabolic lab. And then at the moment, I'm at the She Research Centre in Ireland at the Technological University of the Shannon. And it's just been such an incredible experience. Like the team there, they're they're so innovative and like hungry. And I think Ireland is such a small island that has so much talent across all the different universities. And within the head of the research group is Dr. Aoife Lane, and she's been this like just spearhead to bring all the universities on the island together to form an all-island research consortium for women's health. And I've just never seen anything like it. You know, people are dropping their competitiveness, and, you know, as academics, we all kind of, you know, we can all talk about interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary working, but, you know, there is a competitiveness there. But people have been so open for the better good of improving the health and well-being of women and girls across the island. Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland have come together. Like, it's been really exciting to be part of that. And we had our first kind of inaugural event in January, and we were like, maybe if we get like 80 people there. And we were way over capacity. There was lots of learning. Lots of people couldn't see the screens, but that's good. You know, that obviously there's a desire there for people to invest into this. And about 50% were academics, but about 50% were practitioners and policymakers and people from grant writing bodies or grant bodies. So it's exciting. I think it's a really exciting time for the space. And I feel really like proud and lucky to be a postdoc at SHE at the moment.
You should be proud of the work you're doing. I think it's exciting. And what kind of work is being done at the SHE Research Center, and how is it different from some of the more traditional sports science labs that I know I would be familiar with and I know you've experienced in different capacities?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the actual like infrastructure, or not infrastructure, but I suppose the structure of the research groups compared to my experience in the US and Ireland are just very different in that I think like they just feel like miles apart. But I don't think it's just research groups. I think it's just the academic structures are very different. And I think, you know, even the way that your students are able to have a lot of majors, is that right? Majors and minors, where we don't really have that. It's a very kind of, maybe there might be an elective or two in your final year, but it's quite, you know, a set out program from the offset. Even our PhD structures, like, we have no teaching really in our PhDs, and, you know, we have the defense versus the viva, and so I think it's just, yeah, it's very different. But I think I would like, you know, and I will try to bring in some of the learnings that I've had from the US back to Ireland. So, for example, you know, I had a couple of undergraduate students work with me on that project I mentioned, the cardio-metabolic health one, where that's, from my experience in Ireland, hasn't really been a thing. And so a lot of undergraduate students wouldn't actually get that hands-on experience of research to actually understand, you know, how to collect research, like how to collect data, how to deal with participants and gaining consent. So I think that there's really cool things, I think, that I had the experience of learning in the US that I would like to bring back into kind of the research groups like in Ireland.
Yeah, I think we need a good interchange between the way we do things in both areas. And I know, you know, European studies are much different than the way we do it academically in the US. And I think we could stand to change a little bit. Maybe we would close that 6% gap a little bit better if we did have that understanding.
Yeah.
So you're also working with the HERizon project. And I want to make clear to our listeners and viewers that is spelled HERizon. So could you walk us through the HERizon project and what made it unique, and what are some of the key outcomes?
Yeah, of course. So that project was, I suppose, what I created during my PhD, and the name came from my very little sister at the time. She was I don't know how old she was, but she was little, and, you know, every intervention needs to have a catchy name for your manuscript. So that's where it came from. But it was essentially what started as a project that was going to be very much focused on HIT. It was going to be focused on obese and overweight teenage girls. That's kind of what I signed up to. That was a project that was already created, and I applied to do my PhD with this. And when I got there, I'm thinking, I don't think we're going to get a teenage girl to even get a blood sample or get on a weighing scales, let alone there was like muscle biopsies. There was all these crazy outcome measures that I was like, this is not going to happen with teenage girls. So anyway, I also think, teenage girls with obesity or overweight, I think really we just need to change girls' mindsets around physical activity. Because in general, we know that girls of all different shapes and sizes are not meeting the minimum physical activity guidelines. And we have that huge drop off that we all know about when they hit their teenage years and hit secondary school or high school. And so that's what the project was about. And so we really tried to create it with the girls, for the girls. So we had some kind of focus groups and preliminary work to design the intervention. We had a pilot intervention, and then we had quite a large intervention where, I took some of the learnings from the pilot. So, for example, I did a lot of our communication through Facebook, and they told me I was a dinosaur, that no one uses Facebook anymore. So then we used Instagram, and I'm sure if we did it again, they'd tell me, Emma, you need to move on to TikTok. You need to get and they sound like such silly things, but ultimately the girls aren't going to do it. If we don't really listen to what they need. And again, it ran over COVID. And so there was a couple of different components of it. So the girls all had a booklet or a physical logbook where they could record their physical activity. And it was kind of like a journal. They were also partnered with a master's student sport and exercise psychologist. So they had these kind of one-to-one sessions where, they could reflect on their physical activity goals. And then they also had they didn't have to, but they were invited to join workout sessions with me on Zoom. And they saw me red and sweaty and breathless, slipping and all these things. And I actually think, as embarrassing as, those times might have been for me, I think it was good for them to see, actually, this is really hard. And it's not perfectly polished on YouTube with makeup and perfect lighting. And, they talked about that at the end of the intervention in their exit surveys and exit interviews, of the importance of having someone that was relatable. And they also talked about, when they started the intervention, kind of being afraid of the push-ups and the dumbbell exercises. And by the end of the 3 months, they're like, look at my biceps. I am so proud of them. My brother said my back is getting so big, and I love that, and they were. And so I think that was really interesting for me, in the sense that we have this, or some of us might have the stereotype that girls don't want to get big and don't want to get bulky. But actually, I think once they start exercising and they see how strong they can get, and how resilient they become and how determined they become, I just think it's transformational. And I know that that's across all age groups, but I think particularly for young girls and how they can apply those characteristics to all other life areas outside of the gym or outside of their living room, wherever they're exercising, is incredible. So that was HERizon in not so small of a nutshell. But yeah, it was my most proud project I think I've ever worked on. So
if you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. That's awesome. And where do you think some of the hesitation comes from in young girls, of kind of not wanting to lift the weights, not wanting to put on muscle? I know I hear so much and I know it's changing. I'm getting old. I'm 62 now. And when I started in my career, it was much more common to have women say, I don't want to lift weights because I don't want to bulk up. And now it's like, yeah, I'm lifting more than the guys at the gym. And they're so proud of that. So where's that hesitation coming from? Kind of what did you learn from the HERizon project about motivation, self-image, and movement, particularly for adolescent girls?
Yeah, I mean, I think I I think it is changing, but I do still think it's there. And we've actually just done a recent project. My colleague Kat Schneider at the Centre of Appearance Research and I have done this kind of 2-part study around women in the gym and their body image. So exactly kind of what you're talking about. And they were women of all age, from 18 onwards. And I think it's actually been really interesting because we didn't specify that they had to be in the strength training area of the gym or the weights area. We just said women that go to the gym. But the majority of our respondents talked about being in the weight training area and wanting to be in the weight training area. But there was this kind of, I don't know, I suppose like there seems to be a trend now, you know, when we on social media or like, you know, when we look at fitness brands, a lot of the marketing is now that kind of toned athletic look. Even things like High Rocks and CrossFit and all these things. And so I think lifting weights and being having an athletic physique is trendy now, which is wonderful. However, we also found that we did some kind of standardized scales to kind of assess, you know, I suppose people's desire to be kind of skinny and thin. And although that was down, so I think if we had done that maybe in the 90s, you know, we had that like cocaine chic where everybody wanted to be rail thin. But now we're kind of swinging on the other side where people have this desire to still be quite lean, but also be muscular, but also have a big bum and also have all these things. And so I think it's really great to see more women lifting weights, but I think that there is a balance there to be had, that it's not, again, just turning into a new fad of putting so much pressure on your body to look a certain way for whether it's the male gaze or whether it's because it's trendy or so on. So it's kind of not really answering your question. We did have more women in the weights area. But yeah, there is still, I suppose, something negative going on there with body image and the gym.
Yeah, I think we just tend to see these pendulum shifts of body dysmorphia, you know, where for women in the 90s, you're right, it was, you know, waist thin, you know, didn't really matter about body fat per se. There wasn't that concern. It was, you almost had the skinny fat kind of era in there. It was just being as thin as possible. Now it's like, you know, with males, we see the issue. Teenage males are going to go to the gym and they're going to immediately go to the bench press and the arm curls because they think, I guess that's what the image is all about, you know, having pecs and abs and biceps and not really thinking about leg training. And then women are kind of, and again, it always seems somewhat stereotypical to say, but I think there's the truth to it, that women are going to go hit the glute machines first, you know, the glutes and the hips, because that's what they perceive has to be, like you said, bigger butts, but at least they're focusing more on doing whole body kind of training now, which is a nice shift. But I think it can get dangerous in that women are starting to be pushed toward bigger muscles and smaller waist, you know, six-pack abs and all that. And, you know, I don't think people understand that that's not good for female hormones to be that lean. Mm-hmm. And so, are we missing anything with the HERizon project that we need to talk about?
I don't think so. And the girls didn't say this, you know, necessarily like when we're in those exit interviews or in those focus groups. But I do think that, you know, when we are growing up, I remember, you know, my background, my sport is weightlifting. And, you know, I grew up with my dad saying, "Oh, Emma, like, don't get too big. You know, you're looking a bit bulky." I'm like, "Oh, God, thanks, Dad." And so I'm not surprised that these girls like have that feeling about or that feeling of fear or just needing to look a certain way. And you know, I think even like when they're young, you know, like way before teenage years, we have boys out jumping in puddles and wrestling and in the mud, and girls are, you know, in dresses and playing with dolls. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying, you know, it's not a surprise that young boys are growing up with better fundamental movement skills and how that can track into then being confident and competent in different sports. And I always my heart just goes out to teenage girls, because we're like, you're lazy, or you're dropping out of sport, or, you're not interested. But it's like, well, they don't feel confident in it, because, the curriculum, as I said, is often not set up for girls who just want to move and be active. It has to be like a traditional sport. And in younger years, a lot of girls are not having the same opportunities to go in that rough and tumble play. Yeah. And then obviously what we see on social media, these like perfect in quotation, quotation marks, of what girls need to aspire to look like. It's a lot of pressure for them. And I know boys, I'm always so biased. I only talk about the hardship of girls. And I know boys have, troubles too. But yeah, I feel for them. It's a lot of pressure at that vital life stage of puberty. And yeah.
Now, does the UK have kind of the equivalent of Title IX that we have in the United States?
No, it's not. No, we don't.
So it's a little bit different in there then, because I know here there tends to be a lot more interest now in girls in young sports. And I see the significance of that for aging well. And so how do you perceive the shifts in female exercise science for the aging of women? That makes sense.
Yeah, I think following on from what I was just talking about there, like, with the younger years entering puberty, I know that we do see an increase of women re-engaging with exercise kind of in that college age phase or life stage. But it almost feels like they're like lagging behind. Like they've missed out on those crucial years of, peak bone mass. And I also think, like we've just done some focus groups with teenage boys on their opinions and perspectives of girls playing sport. And it, like, for the most part, it was quite negative, not negative in the sense, but negative in, one of the quotes was, well, they're kind of just obstacles. Like if you're playing soccer, you go around the girls, or the general belief that girls just are lazy, and not a recognition of the fact that there's not opportunities for the girls to partake. And so we have a grant in at the moment, not currently funded, but hopeful. And it's called GRIT, and it's around kind of gym readiness for women. And the age group is kind of from 18 to pre-menopause. And the aim is helping women to have confidence in the gym. So they'll come in for 4 weeks of actually just learning how to turn on the treadmill, how to adjust a bench, how all these really daunting things that for all of us who go to the gym, it's not a big deal, but gyms are so intimidating. The darkness, the loud music, depending on where you go, it's all these machines that people don't know how to work. So the idea is that they can come in and be shown in a really comprehensive way that they feel confident going in. Then they will have, again, a comprehensive training program on all your fundamental movement patterns. And the idea is to really build bone health, to prevent osteoporosis and osteoarthritis later on. Because, I think that there's obviously a huge, I even think of my mom, who would have been in the generation of skinnier the better and afraid of weight training. And I see the results that's having on her. She has pains in her hips now and her bones. And so that's what that's the next stage, hopefully, of my research trajectory, if that was to be funded, really looking at women's bone health for lifelong aging well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things for women to recognize, is that I guess that's an overstatement to say, one of the most important things for women to recognize, and especially coming from a male exercise physiologist. So again, I'm very self-conscious about my presentation of exercise science for women, but I think it's important for women to understand that if you want to reduce your risk of osteoporosis, the best time to do that is going to be in puberty, when you have the opportunity to build up that bone mineral density by doing weight-bearing exercise, weightlifting, and doing sport. And I think, we talk a lot in this podcast that aging well begins in childhood, begins at birth, probably even before birth. And it's even more important probably for women because of what it sets them up for on the lifespan. And I actually believe that, at least in the United States, because of the trends that we've seen over the last 30, 40 years, for really 50 years now, probably since Title IX, is that women are becoming increasingly active. They're more involved in sport and more involved in weight training. And we're seeing a shift of males away from it all because we're much more sedentary. They're playing their video games all the time. And I actually think we're going to see a little bit more of a shift where women are going to be less inclined, and I know part of it is, hormonal, that increases that risk of osteoporosis. But with the activity, that's going to offset some of that hormonal change. But we're going to see males starting to experience a lot more loss in bone mineral density because they're sitting on their butts and not lifting weights and participating in sports quite the way they were, decades ago. Do you kind of see that in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I see all the, we don't have, Title IX in Ireland, but we do have much more initiatives, I suppose, like running to try to get girls who aren't the elite athletes, but they want to be the recreational active girl. And so I think by seeing, and I, again, like I am aware, maybe I'm just blind to anything for the boys, but there does seem to be more of a drive to engage more girls in those participation opportunities. And so, I wouldn't be surprised, if we do see a swing. But in saying that, I think that there is still such a huge discrepancy in, baseline physical activity levels at that age group. But I do think you're right. I do think that it begins at birth, even before birth. I mean, even then, opening the can of worms around, preconception and pregnancy and postpartum, and I suppose the importance of having active parents, having an active mother. But then I think throwing into that the concern that so many women have now because of the lack of research on, is it safe to exercise? Is it safe to do high? I know that, that there's been great work by Margie Davenport around, low intensity resistance training. But I think there is still such a fear for women wanting to conceive and those who are pregnant in what is safe and okay for me to do. So I think, and all of that stems really from just that lack of research specific for women. And
I think one big void is our understanding of what it does during puberty. Women who are physically active, lifting weights, from an epigenetic standpoint, what does that mean for subsequent generations? Because we know that if women are not adequately nourished during puberty, it's going to have an impact on the risk of diabetes in their granddaughters. Well, what about, what if they're lifting weights? Does that have a negative effect? Does it have a positive effect? There's so much that we don't know. I think probably the implication would be that the more physically active, the more fit they are, the better those generations are going to be. At least we could be hopeful of that. And if not, then those future generations just have to work out a little bit more to keep up, right? Because I don't think I would, even if the research said that, working out is going to have, an increased risk of obesity in your granddaughter, which I doubt very much that that's going to be the case. But we can deal with that because of the positive impacts that woman being active in her teen years and beyond are going to have in her life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, just coming back slightly to the research gap, I think it's questions like that are really interesting and impactful and important for us to invest in, to carry out those large scale, expensive studies. And I know, or it seems that there's kind of a lot of conversations at the moment within specifically kind of female sports science. And I suppose on one side, I have an understanding of and I should hold up my hand. Hopefully it's clear in this conversation that I am clearly not a physiologist. I'm not in the labs collecting these blood biomarkers, but I have an appreciation of the expense of that, both kind of financially and time. I had a friend during my PhD who was doing some HIT studies, and, it was taking triple the amount of time to do those acute testing sessions with the female participants compared to the men. And so I appreciate it's not as simple as just saying, oh, we need more research on women. And And I think that, there's another kind of string to that of, well, maybe we don't need to replicate everything. Women aren't small men, but maybe we're not that different for particular topics. But I think and it's that 6% number that's quoted all the time. And hey, I love it. Brings up the citations, love it. But it's actually, for me, it's more about the studies that are only including men. And I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but there was no reason to exclude women. They were topics that, were relevant to both. But the studies that are only including women are subjects and topics like pregnancy or like menopause. And I think that's frustrating. It's a missed opportunity. And even now we're doing a scoping review looking at the mental health and psychosocial health benefits of resistance training for women. And it's a lesson that I'm learning. I only really work with female participants, so I haven't really had this dilemma yet or this challenge yet, but so many of the papers don't disaggregate their data. And so we really don't know the benefit of resistance training specifically for women, because all the sample is kind of piled in together. And even if it doesn't make it into the paper, a supplementary file or something would be so helpful for us to unpick that a little bit more. Especially given the fact that, when we see some kind of crazy studies getting funded that are a bit ridiculous, but we still have to justify why it's important to study women. I think that for me is the frustrating part of this,
I don't disagree there at all. So tell us a little bit about Míde. That's an ambitious all-island effort. How did this come together, and what makes it so important right now?
Yeah, so Míde is an Irish word, and it means the center point. So the idea is that it's multidisciplinary. As I mentioned, it's multi-institutional, and so we're all meeting together in the center to work on topics collectively that will improve women and girls' health and well-being. And so as I said, it launched in January, and we have a couple of projects underway so far. And it's the four, I suppose, co-leads or co-chairs. So one is kind of physical activity, one is data analysis, one is sociology, and one is physiology. And so you can see it's very different, and we're trying to do something that's genuinely so if we tackle something like injury, that we're tackling it from all different angles, not just from the kind of sports medic. And we have some buy-in from kind of the national sporting body in Ireland, who's been wonderful in, supporting some of the projects that we're running. One of them is looking at a gender equity kind of micro course for undergraduate students to kind of help them be advocates for, both women and men, but advocates in general for people who are underrepresented in sports. We have a project running on identifying kind of what the public's research priorities are across the island. We have something running on pregnancy and postpartum. So you can see there's quite a broad remit, and that's what makes it, I think, really exciting and scary. And not scary is not the right word, but it's a new, it's a big project, and it's new, and it's in that kind of messy infancy stage. And so it's exciting what's to come from it, but it's also, not hard work, but it's just that messy initial stage that we're trying to kind of really formulate where we want to go and have the structures in place to allow us to go for these larger grant applications, and how that works logistically across institutions on the island. So
it would appear that kind of this interdisciplinary collaboration is essential for women's health research, exercise science research. Do you think there's potentials beyond Ireland to take this more internationally? Can it be something that we could accomplish here in the United States, as large as we are and as many institutions as we have?
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say that you wanted to join Míde. I was like, oh, great. Yeah, we'd have some American collaborators. I know in Australia, they seem to be doing some really cool work across the country. And, they're doing, I only saw something recently. It's like a machine learning type thing of where they're trying to basically map all the projects that are going on. I think this is kind of what they're trying to do across Australia. And so, if somewhere as big as that is able to collaborate together, I think, and I know like in the US, you have the Tucker Institute and you have all these various centers doing really cool work. But there is something quite brave about coming together and working together, and across disciplines throws a whole other thing. It's different, if you have two physiologists from different institutions, but throw a sociologist into the mix, those conversations are going to be, more challenging. But I'm learning so much from that and seeing other people's perspectives. And I think it is making the research much more it's a higher caliber. And I think, therefore, it will have more impact.
Yeah, you said you thought I wanted to join Míde. I'd probably love to. I'm probably too far along in my career to have much impact on either side. But, I think it would be phenomenal for this to grow more internationally, because I think we do need to see it. And we also have to understand that there are kind of geographical regional differences in how women are interacting with exercise, even men interacting with exercise. And I know for years Australia has done very well in the exercise science areas. I do think in the United States we've been a little bit behind other areas when it comes to more of the sports applications, and probably in particular, we've probably driven much more of that knowledge gap between the men and the women. But I think there's a great opportunity for much greater collaboration within the United States, heck, even within states. I worked in Michigan for about 10 years, and they had a very good kind of intercollaboration among different institutions, not necessarily doing research, but bringing undergraduate programs together once a year for kind of a conference and doing those types of things that I haven't seen in other states. And so we have maybe some opportunities within states, but we have 50 states that need to come together and do that. And then we also have to reach across the pond a little bit to our UK predecessors and kind of bring a little bit more unity into that. But what are some of Míde, and I have it kind of in my notes to call it Míde. I must have looked up the wrong Irish pronunciation, but Míde's core values like equity, advocacy, impact, how are these reflected in the various projects that are going on?
So we've actually set up kind of like a governance structure. So we have, and this is what I mean, we're in the infancy stage, okay? But we have on our website, I think it's up there, that we have kind of this governance structure, or organizational structure, I should call it. And one of those horizontal layers is around governance. One of them is around kind of scientific excellence. One of them is around knowledge translation. And then the projects kind of fit into that vertically. So each project, we have kind of a working group that will ensure that, whatever the results are, they're not just being buried in an academic manuscript, that we're doing podcasts or we're reaching out to practitioners on how we can actually apply this. And we had a scoping review published. It was probably actually around the beginning of the year, maybe January. And so we created more of an accessible report or policy document on that, which just had a very clear infographics to make sure that the key recommendations were highlighted so that people didn't have to, first of all, try to access behind paywalls these articles, but also, just get exactly what they need as the public. So that's what we try to do. And then also, we have kind of a co-creation project running at the moment where we actually have volunteer participants from the public advising on these projects to make sure that we're not sitting in this ivory tower assuming that we know what people want, but actually, we have this group and we've had two quite long meetings with them to get their feedback. And so we're really trying to make sure that the projects that we do as a collective in our initial first year is true to our values and our principles. With the utmost, with the end goal of obviously having excellent science, but really that it's actually having impact for the people that we want it to reach, which is, women and girls, firstly on the island of Ireland.
So how can clinicians, coaches, and other educators begin to kind of take this information and apply it in a more nuanced setting with women in sport and kind of understanding of women's physiology? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think I have a very good answer for that right now. I think, that I mentioned we did that conference or inaugural event in January, and I think we were kind of surprised to see how many people, non-academic people, were interested. And sorry, when I say non-academic, I'm talking about people who are working as researchers or lecturers in the space. We were really surprised to see the interest in the event by them. And so now we're already talking about, the event for 2026, how do we kind of flip it? So instead of, people sitting there listening to kind of our academic 10-minute presentations, actually, how do we get clinicians and practitioners more involved to make sure that we are reducing that kind of research to practice gap? Because I know we all know about this, is it 20 years or something for it to actually, be applied? And so now we have the opportunity where we know that people are interested. Okay, well, how do we actually start to change things? And so hopefully through events like that. And we also have it's called Míde Connect. And so basically it's focused on women, but it's for women working in sport and exercise. So it's not just academics. You might be a coach, you might be in the media, volunteers. And so they've also been having these really nice events. I actually missed the last one of the photo. They're always in amazing locations. The photos look great. But anyway, the idea is to allow these women to network together. There are academics in the room, and so we're reducing those barriers between these different kind of stakeholders or different groups, so that actually there's just this network group of women working in the same area, in the same geographic location, and have various touch points in nice hotels across the year.
What a brilliant idea, getting academics outside their ivory towers and connecting with the people who are most going to use the information and actually listening to the people who need the information. So I'm in awe of what you all are doing. So keep it up. So are there any major myths or misconceptions around women's fitness that you wish people understood better?
Oh, I think the one that I'm struggling with at the moment is this kind of phase-based training. I know it's really popular on social media at the moment, and I actually think Sam and Abby have done a paper recently which I think helps to let me rewind there. But what I mean by phase-based training is this idea that we walk for a quarter of the month for 1 week, and we do yoga for 1 week, and then there's 1 week that we're able to lift heavy weights or run, and then we have to go back to walking, or it's that kind of idea. And I see so many social media influencers kind of pushing this at the moment, and I just think it has the potential to be so detrimental to women. It's telling women how they should feel at a certain time of the month. It takes no regard for the fact that, I usually have very easy periods. My sister does not. My sister has a sore back. She is in pain. Why would we both need to adapt our training in the same way? And I think it just puts pressure. It puts more constricting kind of barriers around how women should behave or exercise. But yes, I think Abby and Sam did a piece on this recently where I think they break it down to actually what phase-based training could be, as opposed to these kind of things that we see on social media that are taking it completely out of context. And so I think things like that is a fear of mine at the moment, because it's just so frustrating to see all the time, and we just don't really have any evidence to actually support it.
Yeah, you bring that up, and something that I've noticed in the exercise physiology text, and I don't know how many editions of the current exercise physiology text that I use in class have been out since I first purchased I actually got it free in grad school, going to conferences. But the number of different editions, and they very rarely identify the principle of individuality when they talk about the principles of adaptation. And it's like, individuality goes beyond gender, race, height, weight, those types of things. There's so much down the hormonal level that we still don't understand, and yet we try and apply everything in this big brush strokes of everybody's the same within their categories kind of thing. And so I appreciate that you're kind of breaking that down a little bit more and challenging those misconceptions. Back to kind of the research and just kind of the opportunities and getting money and funding and so on. What are some of the challenges? I know we've talked about funding a little bit, but publishing, translating women-focused research into policy and practice, because I think that's the main thing that we want to see happen is we do this research, it's got to impact us at the community levels if we want people to get healthy. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the major challenges you've experienced?
I think actually flipping it slightly in that I think it's a really good time, to be in this field. And I think that there's a growing interest, whether it's, just a marketing ploy or what. Hey, I'll take it, even if it's just because we've had this increase. I know we've had the hype with, 50-50, like gender equity or gender equality at the last Olympics. And so there is that kind of marketing hype, I suppose, around it. But I think that actually can help. And for us to ride that wave while, women's sport is popular and trendy and in the press. And maybe I'm in an echo chamber, but it does seem like there is more media coverage. And I think that helps. I've had far more kind of journalists and reach out to me recently about, that first Invisible Sportswoman paper because we have more women playing sport at the elite level, and I'll take that. If that means that's my little crack of the door being open, that's fine. That's great. I do think though, like on the policy level, not in terms of research being conducted on women or with women, but in terms of women academics, I think that's maybe where some institutional policies and procedures could be adapted to better cater for women who are trying to progress their academic careers. And I'm sure this is applied, we're talking about sports science, but I would imagine it's across all disciplines, or definitely, man-dominated disciplines. But, the reality is, we have maybe 50-50 at undergraduate level, even potentially at PhD level, but we have fewer women at professorship level. And it's like, what is that? What's happening in that leaky pipeline? Why are the women leaving? Is it the conditions, working with, majority of men departments? Is it they want to go on maternity leave and therefore their research trajectory slows down and therefore they can't get tenure? It's all these things that I think I don't know what the policy and procedure is, but I think something there probably needs to change because it feels quite unfair for a lot of women. And although we have charters coming in, I know here in the UK and Ireland, we have like the Athena Swan Charter. I don't know if that's also in the US, but trying to make, academic spaces more gender equitable. But yeah, I fear that we are losing some incredible talent, and I don't know why, and I don't know how we necessarily fix that. But I don't think it's women going on another leadership course.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I think we've had a little bit of a setback with that in the United States with some of the kickback on DEI and everything that's going on here. I personally have seen a lot more growth and opportunities for women in exercise science. Sometimes you almost feel as a male that it's to the detriment of the male in the field. But, I think there's that definite need to broaden our scopes, our viewpoints, our experiences, and all of that when it comes to developing kind of diverse faculties across different different disciplines. And I mentioned before, we started recording, Corey Metzger, who is our strength and conditioning coach at Western Oregon, where I teach, is one of the few, female master strength and conditioning coaches that are in the field, and she's brilliant. And she is doing a great job in terms of inspiring our young female athletes to go into strength and conditioning, which is just one of the steps. And I think a lot of it is just people like yourself getting out there in front of the social media and pointing women toward exercise science and towards the opportunities in the field. Because it's not going to come from old white guys like myself that are going to change the demographics of the field. It's going to come from the young people like yourself that are the examples that are showing that there are opportunities. People like Sam as well. And I feel somewhat embarrassed, but also honored by the fact that I've inspired Sam to kind of go into exercise physiology because she didn't see herself in my class. Mm-hmm. And, that was a wake-up call for myself. And I think it is important that the more we can get out there and help women understand that there's a place for them in sport, there's a place for them in the gym, there's a place for them in just being healthy and, doing the things that historically men have been doing, and perhaps excluding women from, that those opportunities are there. And if the opportunities aren't there, then kick the damn door down, right? And so I'm excited for the work that you're doing. And how does this kind of sway into, I know this is the topic of this podcast, is the Aging Well podcast. And we haven't talked a lot about aging, but I think we have, because this is all very important for the aging of women, that they are involved in these activities. So what does aging well mean to you personally and professionally?
I have an 88-year-old granny who still goes to the gym, and she's been a bit wobbly on her feet lately, and the local physiotherapist, I suppose, came to the house recently and gave her a walking stick, and she was so offended by this. she has said it's not a walking stick, it's now her weapon, and that's what I want to be doing when I'm nearly 90. Like, she talks about the people in her gym being decrepit. She does not identify with that, and I just, that's what I want to. I want to be able to carry my shopping bags, and I want to be able to, get up and down my stairs and play with grandchildren or great grandchildren. And I also want to be able to be a professor one day, but I really don't want to have to be up all night breastfeeding a brand new baby while I'm trying to write grant papers to stay in the race. And, I think, yes, I am definitely seeing more women professors who are doing incredible things, but I also know some of the struggles that they've had to get there. And not that men don't have struggles to reach professorship, but not at all. But I suppose I would love for my journey there to be a bit smoother. I suppose just, it always stays with me, like for Invisible Sportswomen, that some of the women talked about how when they had babies or they had children, that work-life balance got better for them because at 5 p.m. or, they had to clock off because they had to go and pick up their children. But there was no recognition of the fact that, coming home to make dinners and clean the house and wash the children, put the children to bed was just a new form of work, unpaid work. And I think that is changing. And we see, I have a wonderful husband. I can't tell you that he's wonderful doing the laundry and things like that, but he's pretty good. I'll keep him. And I hope that, aging in my career, that we see some changes to make it a little bit easier for women on that road to professorship or whatever it is, their pinnacle of their career might be.
I think we see it in some areas. I know the institution I'm at has been very good with that. One of my, I guess she's trying to think if she's not necessarily one of the most recent hires, but she's fairly recent. I'm suddenly now the senior faculty member in our division because the one older faculty member, and I think she's actually younger than me, just retired, but she's been there the longest. But when we hired Laura, she came in and she had young children, and the fact that we had kind of a lactation room in our education building, was a big step for her. I mean, it was a big opportunity. And I think a lot of it is just institutions overall need to be recognizing that there are these different needs. I think we men need to be recognizing that we could pick up the slack a little bit more. When I got married and we had our first kids, my wife was in an executive position. So compare that to academics. She was making twice what I was making. It's like I'm the one that's going to have to, pick up the slack a little bit. So I was the one, had the opportunity to pick up the kids. Well, at the time it was just my son, but pick him up from daycare. If he was sick, I could take him to class. And, I love telling the story to one of my students that when I was teaching anatomy, my son was sick. And so I had him with me in the classroom. And it was this big auditorium-style classroom. And I was on kind of the sloping one side, standing there holding him and talking. And the topic was the medulla oblongata. And I'm holding him and fortunately turned just as I mentioned that one of the functions of the medulla oblongata it's the vomiting center in the brain. Because just as I did right on cue, projectile vomit, and had I not turned, he would have puked all over one of the girls in the class. And, so we have those opportunities. I think sometimes we take them for granted. And we also, males, maybe we had an easier time of taking advantage of those. And with certain biases, women, it's like they're kind of put down for being in that position. But we just need better understanding. And I think that's part of what, this podcast and aging well is all about is, we talk in terms of our SPIEs, our spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social well-being is a key component in aging well. And so changing our social understandings of the genders, of people's position in sport or in academics, whatever it might be, really comes down to the collaborative efforts that we're seeing, you and your group doing in Ireland and trying to expand those beyond just our own institutions to become policy, to become, the norm in society that, we understand that, women are having babies. They're the ones that are, having to bear the child for 9 months, and that impacts their work. For me, when my wife was pregnant, it wasn't an issue for me at work. I didn't have to deal with standing and lecturing with, a developing baby in front of me. But, she had kind of some of the same complications. We were talking last night at dinner. When she was pregnant with my son, she was asked to go to India on a trip, and fortunately had enough sense not to go to India. She was several months pregnant. But, those are things that we need to understand, and having these conversations, I think, gets it out to the forefront. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the big reasons why I was excited to get you on this podcast, to be able to highlight some of these discrepancies, to be able to voice my guilt in maybe not doing my part to push forward some of these agendas sooner. But I think it's an important conversation. And so I'll ask you the question that we ask of all our guests. We're kind of at that point in the conversation. So what are you doing to age well?
Oh, what am I doing to age well? I am taking my creatine. I am doing a lot of Olympic weightlifting. And I am also slowly trying to enjoy running to improve my cardiovascular health. And I mean, apparently it gives you a runner's high mental health, but I haven't got there yet. So I guess that's what I'm doing.
So what kind of training or wellness programs do you think we'll see more of in the future as this research that you're doing matures?
Oh, I mean, I would love to see more studies on women's resistance training. I know that, we have some limited, that there are a few of them, but honestly, I think doing the scoping review that I mentioned, I didn't realize that there was so few, and the majority of them are focused on older women or women with, health conditions like breast cancer. But there's like hardly any I've found so far. If there's anyone listening to this who is running such an intervention, please let me know. But looking at whether it's in the childhood, youth years, or premenopause. So yeah, I would like to see more resistance training programs for women at those life stages.
And the resistance training you're talking about is not the little pink 5-pound dumbbells, just doing high volume repetitions of that. You're talking maybe getting women into some Olympic lifting, powerlifting, doing real strength-based exercise.
Yes.
I think there's a huge opportunity in those areas. We had last year, I had on a woman, Kim Rahir, who is a German. She had MS and came from MS to being a kind of Olympic-style weightlifter in her own age bracket. And, just really cool, overcoming there. And then I have another, she's a colleague of mine on campus. She decided, I guess it's a couple of years ago now, that she had long wanted to donate an organ, a kidney, to somebody. And so she decided, better now than never. And so she decided to just donate a kidney, not to a family member or any of that, just, as a social obligation. She had 2 healthy kidneys. She could give one up, and she wanted to make sure she was in good shape prior to doing that. And so she contracted with one of my former students who was doing personal training, started lifting with her, got in pretty good shape prior to the surgery, had, everything went well with the kidney transplant. She recovered fine. And she didn't stop there. She's continuing. She's now wanting to compete in powerlifting. And she's my age, so she's like early 60s.
It's incredible.
Yeah, there's great stuff happening, and there's great opportunities for women. And I think people like yourself and Sam and others are helping those doors to open up and for people to be aware of what they can do. So I have great hope for what kinds of programs, whether it's training or wellness programs, we might see, particularly for women as this research matures. So is there anything we missed talking about today? I feel like we could probably go on and on and on.
I know. No, I don't think so. I love working with Sam and with like other colleagues that are, at postdoc or early in their research careers. And now, I'm able to bring in some PhD students. And yeah, I'm really excited too about, the way that things seem to be moving. I am very conscious that maybe I am in an echo chamber, but, people are doing really cool stuff. And, I think are more aware of the importance of knowledge translation. And so I think it can have more impact. And so, yeah, I'm excited too, to see where, things go. Maybe we'll do another audit in 10 years' time and maybe that 6% will have improved. We'll see.
Well, let's not wait 10 years to have you back on the podcast. We'll have to maybe have you and Sam on in like another 6 months or so, maybe for next season, to just kind of talk about the state of women's exercise and where we've been, where we're going, how much more distance we have to cover, and just kind of keep this at the forefront.
I'd love that. I would love that.
All right. So we will plan on that, and I'll let Sam know as well, or you can. We put her on the hook.
Yeah. Anytime I can pin Sam down somewhere to have a chat, I will be there. Yes, I look forward to that.
Well, I just appreciate your time today. I know it's probably late in your day, you're 8 hours behind or ahead of me?
Yeah. It's just after 6, in the evening.
Yeah. So it's 10 o'clock here. You probably want to maybe get to lifting or go home and do the laundry since your husband's not doing it. I really appreciate your time. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep progressing exercise science in the way that you are, and just keep aging well.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.